CFA level 2 curriculum is perhaps the most difficult across all the three levels, and in the last few weeks of your CFA level 2 exam preparation, you need to be able to recap everything which you have read so far. Let's start with corporate issuers or corporate finance's first chapter, which is capital structure. In capital structure, mainly you have to remember two important formula or relationships. First is for weighted average cost of capital or WACC. Now this is simply a weighted average of cost of equity and cost of debt. Obviously debt cost has to be adjusted for tax benefits. Now what are the weights here? Weights essentially are the market value of debt and equity. If we go to the next relationship, it is about the value of the company with respect to the debt structure, and the relationship for that is value of a levered firm, or rather I would say value of a firm who has taken some amount of debt is equal to value of an unlevered firm plus the tax advantage of debt and subtract the present value of any financial distress cost which you think or perceive. Now obviously this is a general kind of a formula, and if you ignore the present value of financial distress cost or ignore the tax advantage, then definitely the value of your levered firm is equal to the value of your unlevered firm, which means that debt has no role to play in valuation. Let's go on step by step. So the first case which we will be considering is when there is no tax and also there are no costs of financial distress. In this case, WACC remains constant, unaffected by the capital structure, which means that debt by equity ratio does not decide your WACC. So the cost of equity increases as you increase the proportion of debt in your capital, and the relationship is linear. If we move to the next case when we have a non-zero tax, but we still ignore the present value of other financial distress costs, then WACC falls down as we keep on increasing the debt percentage or debt by equity ratio. Why so? Because the debt has a tax advantage. As a result of that, even your cost of equity rises at a less steeper rate than your earlier case. So essentially your slope changes from R0 minus RD to R0 minus RD into 1 minus T, which means essentially you have decreased your slope. So your cost of equity is changing slowly. So on an average basis, your WACC or weighted average cost of capital will fall down if you keep on increasing your debt. And as a result of that, your value of a levered firm will keep on rising as you increase the debt to equity ratio. But in the earlier case, the debt to equity ratio has no effect on the value of the company or firm. Now these two cases have been given by Modigliani and Miller. You can say MM for simplicity purpose. So MM states that either take tax or no tax, but do not consider any costs of financial distress. So in these two situations, different things will happen. If you take no tax, your debt to equity ratio does not decide the value of the firm. But if you take tax, or rather say non-zero tax, you will have greater advantage of debt. So keep on taking more debt, your value will keep on increasing. Now let's move on to the more general situation when you have non-zero tax and you also have to consider costs of financial distress. Now this case is known as static trade-off theory. So in static trade-off theory, you have to consider the most general case for WACC and value of the firm, which we discussed in the beginning of the video. Over here you can pretty much understand that the tax advantage is going to be balanced by the present value of costs of financial distress at some point of time. So you essentially have a trade-off. So you will have an optimal level of debt to equity and corresponding to that an optimal level of WACC or weighted average cost of capital. So if you compare MM and static trade-off theory, in MM there is no optima. In static trade-off theory there is an optima. In MM, when you consider taxes, essentially you can keep on taking debt as much as you want. But that's not the case in static trade-off theory. You have an upper limit. Beyond that, debt is not optimal. And the next thing which is important is, do read about agency costs and costs of asymmetric information. Now these are very simple things to read. So go through the CFA curriculum and you will just sail through these things on yourself. And there is also a formula which I don't find very much useful, but still you can remember it for the sake of completion. Beta of an asset, beta means the undiversifiable risk, is just a weighted average of beta of the debt and beta of the equity. Now obviously the weighting has to be on the fraction of debt and on the fraction of equity basis.